December 14th, 1833. The ancient city of Ansbach, Germany, was gripped by a merciless winter chill. The trees of the court garden wore shrouds of silver white, and the entire town was buried in a profound, heavy silence. Then, piercing that stillness, a lone young man stumbled through the deep snow, his footsteps desperate and failing. His name was Kaspar Hauser. A few years prior, he had appeared suddenly from the shadows of history. Now, he bore the cold mark of death upon his chest. In the shadows of the court garden, near the monument known as the epitaph, he had gone to meet a stranger. A man had promised him the truth, documents revealing the secret of his birth. Kaspar had walked into the trap, unarmed and defenseless. But what awaited him was not the truth. It was the cold, sharp gleam of a dagger. Stabbed deep through the left side of his chest, the young man fled. Pain searing through him, he trailed droplets of crimson blood across the white snow, running toward his home, desperate to outrun the shadow of death. Before he drew his final breath, he left behind a cryptic note, written in mirror script, allegedly handed to him by the assassin. The words were like a curse, suggesting his origins lay near the borders of the German Confederation, within the Grand Duchy of Baden. This tragedy was no mere provincial murder. Behind it lay a web of obsession and power, entangling the glory of Napoleon's empire and the noble bloodlines of Germany. Napoleon Bonaparte ascended the throne as Emperor of France. To solidify his empire, he sought to bind the nations of Europe with chains of blood. At the center of this strategy was Stéphanie de Beauharnais, the beautiful niece of Napoleon's wife, Josephine. Napoleon formally adopted her as his daughter, granting her the title of Princess of France. Then, in 1806, she was sent away as a pawn in a political marriage to Charles, the hereditary Grand Duke of Baden. It was a one-way ticket, from the glittering courts of Paris to the conservative, closed circles of the old German aristocracy. Stéphanie brought more than just the prestige of the House of Bonaparte. She carried the hope of a legitimate heir for the House of Baden, a light that would secure the future. But that light was being hunted before it was even born, by a shadow lurking within the palace walls. In 1812, Stéphanie gave birth to her long-awaited first son. Could this infant have been the boy who would become Kaspar Hauser? This hypothesis is no mere fantasy. Behind it lies the cold ambition of the Countess of Hochberg, the Grand Duke's second wife, who craved the throne for her own sons. And a terrifying suspicion that has never been erased from history: the switching of the royal babe. The life that withered in the snowy gardens of Ansbach was not just that of a nameless orphan. It was the cruel, belated end of a lost prince. A boy stripped of his throne, robbed of the light, and entombed in a dark dungeon for 16 years. Why was he kept in a hole beneath the earth, hidden from the world? And what was the true source of the tears shed by Stéphanie, Napoleon's daughter?
May 26, 1828. Whit Monday, a sacred holiday. The city of Nuremberg, Bavaria, lay bathed in the gentle warmth of a festive afternoon. In the Unschlittplatz, a square on the north side of the city, a strange young man stood frozen upon the cobblestones. He appeared to be 16 or 17 years old, yet his gait was as unsteady as a drunkard, and his tattered, humble clothes made him look, at first glance, like a common waif. But the aura surrounding him was not born of mere poverty. It was something alien. When townspeople approached, he responded only with incoherent moans, sounds like those of a bird or a frightened animal. The only phrase he could utter, not a prayer nor a cry for help, was a hollow, fragmented sentence. "I want to be a rider, like my father." Taken into custody by the Nuremberg police, the boy would, in the coming days, send shivers through the hearts of doctors and officials. His body was fundamentally different from any human raised in a civilized world. His skin was as thin as a newborn's, blistering and inflaming at the slightest touch of sunlight. His eyes possessed an agonizing sensitivity. In total darkness, he could read the fine print of a Bible with ease. Yet, in the light of day, he writhed in excruciating pain. His sense of smell was unnaturally sharp, detecting the scent of a single flower hundreds of meters away, while the mere smell of meat caused him to suffer violent fits of vomiting. He could accept no food other than bread and water, a silent testament to the fact that in his entire life he had known nothing else. Eventually, when given a pen, his trembling hand scratched out a name: Kaspar Hauser. It was the only piece of identity he had carried out from the world of darkness. As Kaspar began to learn the language of men, the past, he revealed, was so horrifying it shook the very foundations of 19th century society. "I was always in a small, underground cell," he whispered. "I never saw the light of the sun. I never heard the birds. I never saw another human face." According to Kaspar's testimony, for as long as he could remember, he had been trapped in a cell so cramped he could not even lie down. Food was brought by a mysterious man while he slept. Sometimes his water was drugged to plunge him into a deep, heavy slumber. The first time he ever saw the sun was the moment that same man dragged him out, forced him to learn how to walk, and abandoned him on the street corners of Nuremberg. The appearance of this wild child ignited a frenzy among the intellectuals of Europe. Philosophers and educators viewed him as a pure soul, untainted by civilization. But elsewhere, a certain faction watched the boy's emergence with a freezing, paralyzing terror. The only toys Kaspar had played with in his cell were 2 wooden horses, and that lingering phrase, "a rider like my father." Were these merely the fantasies of a child? Or were they the fading echoes of a life before the dungeon, of royal crests and a father who served as a cavalry officer? As the boy's memories grew clearer, shadows began to stir in the back alleys of Nuremberg, seeking to silence him forever. Stéphanie, the princess whom Napoleon once praised for her beauty, the age of the dead prince she had lost, matched this boy's age with a cruelty that was impossible to ignore. When the news of a youth named Kaspar Hauser reached the Grand Duchy of Baden, the palace along the Rhine did not celebrate. Instead, it trembled in secret terror. For years, a curse had hung over the royal corridors like a suffocating black mist, an unnatural string of tragedies that defied explanation. At the center of this curse stood Stéphanie de Beauharnais, the adopted daughter of Emperor Napoleon, a bride as radiant as she was unfortunate. Stéphanie had married Charles, the hereditary Grand Duke of Baden, in 1806. It was a cold, calculated move by Napoleon to bind the German states to his will. For the beautiful Stéphanie, raised in the free, vibrant air of Paris,
The Baden court was a frozen prison, stern, stoic, and deeply resentful of all things French. Her greatest enemy was the Countess of Hochberg, the second wife of the previous Grand Duke, a woman of lower noble birth, consumed by a burning ambition. The Countess desperately wanted her own sons to sit upon the throne of Baden. But by law, they had no right to inherit. If Stéphanie gave birth to a male heir, the Countess's dreams would be buried forever. Within the palace walls, a silent, deadly duel began between these two women. A war of shadows that lasted for years. Then, on the fateful night of September 29, 1812, Stéphanie gave birth to her long-awaited first son. The nation rejoiced at the birth of this light that would continue the royal line. But the joy lasted only 14 days. The infant prince suddenly fell gravely ill, and on October 16th, without any clear explanation, he was pronounced dead. Among the ladies-in-waiting, a terrifying rumor began to spread. A woman in a white veil appeared in the prince's bedchamber. They whispered of the White Lady, a legendary ghost said to herald doom for the House of Baden. But historical suspicion suggests a truth far more sinister. It was no ghost, but the Countess of Hochberg in disguise. It is believed she entered the room carrying a dying infant from the village and stole away Stéphanie's healthy prince in the dead of night. Stéphanie never believed her son was truly dead. She was forbidden from seeing the body, and the funeral was conducted with unnatural haste. In the years that followed, she bore more sons, but they too perished one by one under suspicious circumstances. "My children, they are being murdered." This agonizing suspicion drove Stéphanie into a deep, lonely isolation. After the fall of Napoleon, her protector, she was pushed from the political stage, receding into a quiet, shadowed life at Mannheim Palace. But then, in 1828, an unbelievable report arrived from Nuremberg. A young man has appeared, claiming he was chained in a cellar for 16 years. His age matches that of the lost first prince. In Stéphanie's heart, a hope she thought long dead flared up like a searing pain. She yearned to see him. She sent secret agents to gather every scrap of information. But the closer she drew to the truth, the darker the shadows of the Baden court became. An invisible hand began to move. The Countess's son, Leopold, was now sitting upon the throne. If Kaspar Hauser was truly the rightful prince, the current government would crumble to dust. Kaspar was no longer just a mysterious orphan. He had become a walking bomb, capable of shattering a kingdom. The gears of the conspiracy began to accelerate. Before Stéphanie's lonely tears could even dry, an assassin was being whispered into the back alleys of Nuremberg. The story of Kaspar Hauser, once called the Miracle of Nuremberg, began to take on a darker, more ominous hue as he grew accustomed to the light of civilization. As the boy found his voice, as he spoke more of his dark past, an invisible enemy began to emerge from the shadows. October 17th, 1829. A little over a year since Kaspar was first rescued, the first strike occurred. Kaspar was in the attic of his mentor and guardian, Professor Dalmer, when he was ambushed by a man. The assailant was draped in a pitch-black cloak, his face hidden behind a dark veil. Without a word, the man drew a concealed razor and slashed Kaspar's forehead with surgical precision. "You must die." The cold, ruthless whisper burned into Kaspar's memory. It was a voice hauntingly similar to the man who had kept him in the cellar. Kaspar survived, but the incident changed everything. He was no longer just the most famous foundling in the world. He was now a marked man, a target. During this time, another enigmatic figure appeared, the British nobleman Lord Philip Henry Stanhope. Lord Stanhope used his vast fortune to buy the rights to Kaspar's guardianship, showering the boy with excessive affection. He publicly declared he would adopt Kaspar, whispering to him, "You might be of British noble blood." He moved Kaspar from Nuremberg to Ansbach, but behind this generous benefactor, a chilling dissonance lingered. While Stanhope pampered Kaspar to his face, he was secretly writing reports to the elites of Europe, labeling the boy a pathological liar. Was he an angel sent to save Kaspar? Or was he an agent of the Baden court, sent to muddy the waters of his true identity? Modern research points to evidence that Stanhope was in constant, secret contact with the House of Baden, specifically the faction of the Countess of Hochberg. It is highly likely he was tasked with a psychological assassination, isolating Kaspar and stripping his words of all credibility. Meanwhile, in her secluded home in Mannheim, Stéphanie de Beauharnais was consumed by anxiety. When she heard of the first assassination attempt, her suspicion turned into absolute certainty. They are trying to kill him because his existence is a threat. Stéphanie tried desperately to meet with Kaspar in secret, but her every move was blocked by Stanhope or by the web of the Bavarian police. Mother and son were only a few dozen miles apart, yet they remained on parallel lines, destined never to cross, separated by a wall of high-stakes politics. By 1833, Kaspar was no longer the innocent, wild child. The weight of impossible expectations, the constant surveillance, and the agonizing question of, "Who am I?" began to erode his mind. He started to tell lies, losing the trust of those around him. It was exactly what the conspirators had hoped for. But one man refused to give up. Judge Anselm von Feuerbach, who had relentlessly investigated Kaspar's origins. He was compiling a mountain of evidence to prove the prince substitution theory of the Baden family. But fate was merciless. In May 1833, Feuerbach died a sudden, mysterious death. Though poisoning was strongly suspected, the secret died with him. The strongest weapon to prove Kaspar's identity was lost forever. With his protectors gone and the world branding him a fraud, Kaspar stood on the edge of a lonely abyss. The only path left for him was to walk straight into a trap. December 14th, 1833. The court garden of Ansbach. A single note falling onto the snow. It was a blood-stained invitation, leading to the final destination of the tears shed by Napoleon's daughter.
December 17th, 1833. After 3 days of agonizing struggle, Kaspar Hauser's short life came to an end in his home in Ansbach. He was 21 years old. His final words were not of resentment toward his killer. Instead, he murmured a resigned farewell. "I must now go by myself." The autopsy revealed a chilling truth. The angle of the blade, the brutal force required to pierce his heart. This was no self-inflicted wound to gain attention, as the public had whispered. It was the fruit of a clear, cold intent to kill. News of Kaspar's death surged across Europe like a tidal wave. But there was one woman who mourned him more deeply than any other, and in total secrecy. Stéphanie de Beauharnais, living in de facto imprisonment within the walls of Mannheim Palace. It is said that when she heard of Kaspar's death, she collapsed in inconsolable grief. To her dying day, she never doubted he was her son. A legend remains that when she finally lay on her deathbed, by her pillow sat a small carving, a wooden horse, just like the ones Kaspar played with in his cell. To the woman who rose to the heights of an empire only to fall into the darkness of a court, Kaspar was the life that had been stolen from her. Meanwhile, a bitter irony awaited the Countess of Hochberg and her son, Leopold. After Kaspar's death, a strange misfortune haunted the House of Baden. Leopold's direct bloodline eventually withered, and the Grand Duchy of Baden vanished from history with the German Revolution of 1918. The throne they committed murder to protect crumbled like a castle of sand. Time passed. In 1996, modern science stepped in to silence the mystery forever. Led by the German magazine Der Spiegel, DNA was extracted from bloodstains on the underwear Kaspar wore on the day he was stabbed. The result shocked the world. Kaspar's DNA does not match the House of Baden. Science had denied the prince. But the story did not end there. In 2002, researchers at the University of Munster conducted a new test, this time using strands of Kaspar's hair. The data suggested a startling new possibility. A genetic link to the House of Baden cannot be ruled out. The findings contradicted the previous test. Even science could not fully illuminate the shadows of 150 years ago. Kaspar Hauser. Was he a prince entombed in darkness because of his noble blood? Or was he merely a lost soul, so lonely that he performed the role of a prince until the weight of the fantasy killed him? His gravestone in Ansbach still bears these words: "Here lies Kaspar Hauser," a riddle of his time. His birth was unknown, his death a mystery. Beside that cold stone, it is as if the portrait of Princess Stéphanie, once smiling in the lights of Paris, still watches over the truth in silence. The whispers of the White Lady lost in the darkness. The freezing silence of an underground cell. The only ones who know the answer no longer walk this earth.